Okay, that's live. Let me pop out chat. Okay. Got it. Hello. Good, cool. Check one more thing. I'm gonna plug in my phone, I'll be right back. Okay. All right. This is the Sausage Sports Club Weekly Update. I do this every week to talk about what I worked on the game, how I'm feeling about it, what's next, that kind of stuff. I do this for 4 reasons. One is I think it's a useful resource for new students or developers to see how people make a game, like the choices they make, what kind of problems you run into, stuff like that. 2, there's an obvious marketing usefulness to just like talking about the game every week and showing new content and stuff like that. So that's another reason. 3 is a selfish reason of wanting to keep a record of my design process and like my process of making the game. So in 5 or 10 or whatever years, I can look back and see how this game was made and how I felt about it and what kind of problems I was running into and where I was at as a designer. And 4 is, since starting this chat, I've noticed sometimes people who are smarter than me or more experienced at various parts of making a game will come into chat and give me a tip, and then that improves how I make games. So that's cool. Before I really get into it, I want to preface I'm a little bit sick, so I hope that doesn't turn you off of the stream too much. next week, this is still like GDC sickness, so hopefully next week I'll be back to normal. Okay, so this week was kind of rolling back into things after GDC. Like I mentioned last week, I was kind of like, kind of going at like a lot less than 100% because I was at GDC talking to people, hanging out. It's kind of my yearly vacation, is going to San Francisco and seeing a bunch of new friends. I did do some playtesting stuff, and I did arrange for a lot of people to be giving me feedback on the most recent builds and stuff, but it was kind of like prep work for what's happening now and will be happening for the next few weeks, which is fixing the game and making it good and like tweaking all the knobs that I've created over the last, I don't know, like three or 4 months of adventure mode to try to make that have good pacing and interesting story and last the right amount of time and like dole out unlocks at the right pace and stuff. And also, of course, to like fix bugs, make it as seamless as I can before hopefully a lot of people get in there and like find bugs we wouldn't have found. But so that's what I've been doing, and that's kind of the overview of what's going on now. This week specifically, I've been working a lot on localization. I think I mentioned this briefly last week, but I've known for a long time I want to localize the game into as many languages as I can. And at GDC, I found out that the Nintendo of Japan team likes the game, and so I want to, try to get on their good side by localizing it in Japanese and like making it easy for them to like, give me support if they can. So I've been working on localization. Let me just pop open the game here so you can see where I'm at. It's going really well. I expected it to take about a week and a half of like full-time work to just get localization in the game everywhere that it needs to be and like in a pretty good state, and it's been a little bit less than that, which is kind of a rare win. Usually, game development, everything takes longer than you expect. but this is in a pretty good state now. If you're a Japanese speaker, which I doubt there's anybody in chat that would be speaking Japanese and viewing my chat, but you'll notice that this is not like great Japanese. It's just like, what the hell? There we go. That label is weird. So this is all just Google Translate Japanese. At this point, I need to actually like hire somebody or find somebody to do like a real translation for me. And you can even see some of it, like Google Translate didn't even do the job right, like paintball and coins here, like those aren't words that have a direct translation, so Google doesn't know what to do there. Sausage Sports Club, apparently Overworld that way. But this is, as far as I know, this is everywhere in the game. For the most part, like here I'm seeing there's a menu label here that doesn't have that doesn't know to change fonts when I switch languages to Japanese. So right now it's trying, like I'm telling this label to display Japanese text and it hasn't changed to the Japanese font. So it's like these warnings are all complaining like, oops, we don't have that. We don't have those characters in this font, which is my English font. So, so that's fine. What does my list say I want to talk about here? Yeah, so this week was interesting because the game has gotten really big and there are a lot of places that I need to localize, and doing it manually by hand for every place in the game would be a huge time sink and a pain in the butt. And also kind of, if I just did it by hand, it wouldn't future-proof me. So if I expand the game in any way, I won't be able to like do that like whatever automated process would be the alternative. I wouldn't be able to do that. I have to do that by hand again. So I've spent some time making tools. I think I talked about this a little bit last week. I made some more now. I think last week what I showed was that I have a tool to process all of my story kind of prefabs, my quest prefabs I should say. For adventure mode, there's 20 something quests, and for each one of these quests, there's like several pieces of dialogue. And previously, the tool would specifically get all of the quest prefabs in this folder and search through the like top level dialogue type. It would like look for properties of this quest type class, and then find all the properties that are of the type dialogue chunk. And just go through them and like basically make an associated term for every line in a dialogue chunk array, and then tell the dialogue chunk you're associated with this term. So when you get played in dialogue, like use this term to look up what like the translated version of your dialogue is. And that also put into my term sheet here. You know, put all of the dialogue lines for all the stuff in the game. And that brings me to my point that I'm trying to make here, that the game is really big now and there's just a lot of text, and it kind of snuck up on me that it got this big. And I wasn't really expecting it. I was kind of expecting like maybe like 5,000 lines of dialogue, just like total ballpark guess, whatever. And it turned out that it's actually more like 10,000, which is kind of scary. It's just like a scale problem of there's a lot more stuff to translate, and if I want to do, I don't know, if I want to do 5 languages, that's about how much I want. 10,000 words is a lot more, costs a lot more than 5,000 words. So gotta figure that out. So another thing I discovered this week regarding localization is this I2 is the plugin, just to recap, is the plugin I use for localization. I noticed that it has categories, which lets you kind of sort by certain types of stuff. So if I want like characters, for example, I can select that to view. If I want dialogue, I can do that. And I can also select all, and that'll only select everything in dialogue. Basically, this is like kind of an obvious feature that you would want. And because I've never like localized the game before, I didn't know that was like a useful thing. I didn't appreciate that I would want that, but once I discovered it and started using it, it's really cool. So I basically had to like incorporate that a little bit, and one interesting problem that creates, locutils translate, is when I'm translating something that is in one of those categories. Let's say like I'm displaying the name of a hat in some UI piece that shows what hat I'm wearing. Previously, I could just send the enum as a like toString, whatever, into my translate function, and that would do it correctly. And but now with this categories thing, I have to like send it with the categories thing, otherwise it won't like match up correctly to the term, and it's a little bit weird. Where's a good example of this? I think the hat widget, hat select widget is what I want. Translate. Not page. Would this be hat option? Yeah, okay, it's hat option. Yeah, so like here I have to do this like string format thing so that I get, instead of like top hat as my string, I want to do hats top hat. So it's not like a super complicated thing, but having already gone over a bunch of places in the game where I had to like do this local utils translate and like figure out what's supposed to go in there. Now I have to go back over that and do this categories thing. It's annoying, but the payoff is like definitely worth it for the organizational benefits. That's a new thing. So that's cool. What else we got? Yeah, and that problem specifically exists for like text labels that are like, it's decided what will be displayed there in code. That's like why it matters. Somewhat related problem that also affects, hey Mauricio, welcome. A similar problem that is also only affects code affected, text labels, is when I do my like keybind or my menu option or whatever to switch between different languages. If something is changed in code, like if some label is changed in code, that thing may not necessarily get a callback to like change its display properly to match what the new language is. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Like in let's say in a quest, like when I'm playing adventure mode, in the top left up here, there's like a little prompt that says like, go find some character, or go collect something, 1 out of 3 things collected. It's got like the number there. When that localize like function gets called on everything in the game because we change languages, that's not like the string there. I can't just say like localize that string that's there. I need to actually like run the code again that takes in like the sentence that describes the situation and the character and then the numbers, and like translate that string again properly. So it's a little bit weird, and I have to like go through some parts of the code again and like add a callback that listens for when localize is called, and then like do this shit. And it's that seems like it's gonna be pretty annoying, but first step in solving a problem is defining the problem, and as I'm doing this localization, I'm defining the problem more and more, and so it's getting more solvable. As I kind of mentioned there, like if I have a phrase and then a character gets slotted into that, that's not really going to be in the same order in every language. I don't know Japanese, like I don't speak Japanese, but I think the name goes before like the phrase in Japanese, whereas in English the name might come at the end or the beginning, depending on the phrase. So that's a thing. A new thing I also learned is that because you're like a default font that you would put into Unity if you're an English speaker, whatever, probably doesn't have every character for every language, because that would be like a big file. Probably just has the English characters, which is like 26 plus another 26 for capitalized, plus maybe another 30 or 40 for just like weird symbols and whatever. But Japanese text, I think I have like 300 characters, which is a lot more in the Japanese font, which includes some English characters because, like I showed, yeah, here like these words aren't recognized, so there's English in the text that will be displayed by the Japanese font, and like I showed last week, there's this character set thing in I2 that generates like all of the characters that are used by the font. Okay, so it's 900. Damn, I thought it was only 300, but whatever. Why am I bringing this up? Oh, point being, like, I need to make sure all of my labels actually properly switch to the font matching whatever language we're in, and it turns out that that's, and it makes sense that this is true. It turns out that that's not an automated process. You have to have, I can do it here. I'll leave play mode. Turns out that you need to have the localize component. If you, I don't know if anybody watching this would be familiar with localize, but, or I2, I guess is what it's called. But there's a component called localize that you put onto any component, whether it's text or image or whatever, that you want to change it when the game is running in a different language mode. And let's do main menu. Where am I looking for menu label here? Okay. So like this, it says main menu now, but when you switch between different pages of the menu, it might say adventure, or it might say quick play, or yeah. But because I'm assigning this from code and I need to localize it in code, I need to make sure that if I'm assigning Japanese text, I need to have a Japanese font to be assigned. And early on, I thought this was automatic for some reason. I'm not really sure why I thought that, but turns out that the way to do this is to change the main page, the main like result of the term to be none. So I'm not going to change the text here because we assume that code will do it, which is true for this component. In secondary, we're going to look up font, which is a category like I mentioned before. And then we choose one of these, and this is the menu like styling for this is just outline, so that's what I'll use. Is that right? That looks bad. What? Is that really what I use? Okay, I gotta revisit this font because it looks bad, but oh, it looks so shady. And anyway, I'll worry about that later, but you can see like why. I think it makes sense why I need to do this change. So now if we go back in, it will actually like update that menu panel at the top where I switch to Japanese instead of it just showing blank over and over. There's also an issue with the back button, and I'm not sure what the deal was there. Outline. New menu panel. Back term. Quit term. These right. Back and quit. And then let's check I2. So I don't know if this was clear before, but when I was in the menu, the back button, which is also the same place as the quit button, was showing like white text instead of, you know, the translated version of quit or back. I'm not really sure why that is. So now I'm like debugging, I guess. Back looks fine. Don't want that. Terms. Just give me default. Let's do quit. Okay, so that looks fine too. So that's weird. Let's try this again. So that's kind of all the localization stuff I'm going to talk about. It kind of became clear over this week that there's like localization is a weird problem because it affects every piece of UI in your entire game, like on an individual like text level. So the takeaways for me were it's worthwhile to write tools to automate the process of like integrating localization or like making terms for pieces of code or all the UI elements in your game. I guess I should go over the tools because I only mentioned like one of them. But that was one big takeaway. The other takeaway is that it just requires a lot of like little like nitpicky playing through the game, like trying every fucking piece of UI. It'll probably be worth me like making a list of every piece of UI in the game and like doing a checklist of like, okay, I checked this, it looks good, it's not wrong. Why the fuck is that wrong? Oh, this is what I was talking about with the I need to set this in code. When I switch between languages, the quit button should get localized again into the language, but it's not. It's just like trying to use the same it's just like trying to use the new font with the old like characters that were placed there. And in the Japanese font, that's actually okay because quit QUIT are all characters represented in the Japanese font. I mentioned there are like 900 characters in there. When you switch to so I'm on the back page, switch to Japanese. Now when I go back, now it's in Japanese correctly because the code, when I switch back, actually sets it to like the correct term, which is the back term or the quit term. So that's I'm gonna have to go through and add all those callbacks, which is annoying. Okay, let's do tools. Let's talk about that. So once I made that story quest thing, I was like, that's great. That's like a very useful tool. But I wish I could do that for all of the prefabs because there's actually a lot of like different kind of states of the game. First button looks like a white square. Yeah, it's definitely not right. I think I might have those labels might be set to bold or something. Where you see, oh, I think that's what's going on there. Yeah, they're all set to bold. So I need to do a pass on the visuals of all of it, but this was more of a test for me or like trying to get like a first pass of everything so I could send it to the Nintendo Japan team and be like, hey, look, I did this, like, what do you think? And hope they like help me out or something. Just by showing that like, hey, it's cool that you guys are interested in the game. I'm interested in coming to Japan. So I'm hoping that turns into something. Let's look at these tools. So yeah, I did the story quest thing that seemed useful. I was like, I wish I could do this for all prefabs because different game states in the game, like different. I don't want to get into the idea abstractly of what a game state is, but in different modes, like the tutorial for like the hat select thing, or like the finale of the game, or like various like kind of sequences in the game, I use this idea of a payload, which is here's a game object that holds a bunch of useful data, or like maybe like prefabs as children, or like lighting or scene setup, or maybe like very specific UI or something. I put that in what's called a payload, which is like something I can spawn, and it's it could live in the scene or it could not, and it's just useful to like chunk data in that way so that you can load it when you need it. Like another example of this is all the modes in the game like are in payloads. So like if I play Junkyard Soccer, there's a payload for that has like how long should it last, like what is the layout of the goals and stuff, and that's, I think of that as a payload. The reason I'm explaining this is because for those sequences that I'm talking about, the like hat shop tutorial or the finale, in that payload I have sequences of dialogue which, you know, would be useful to automatically parse through and like set up dialogue terms for. So I changed my localization thing to process all prefabs, which I could show the code for this. Tools. Okay, so process all prefabs. The idea of this is that I load all of the prefabs in the project, iterate over all of them, iterate over all of their components, get a serialized object of those one at a time, which basically means like I'm getting what the editor, the Unity editor sees. Like I'm taking that in data form so that I can change like private properties and like or private fields and do what I need to do as if I was doing stuff in the inspector. Like all that stuff would be accessible to me in the same way it might be in the inspector, but I can do it automatically and like basically instantly. So I'm iterating over all these things. If I find any dialogue chunks, which is an array of kind of like a little dialogue bit, which I could show you. Payload. Welcome dialogue. Yeah, like this here is a dialogue chunk, which is like a piece of text, a character, an emote, or I guess that is like whether it's a choice or not. There's an emote. I can make the emote loop, and that's like all the like in making a bunch of these dialogues, like writing 10,000 words of dialogue or whatever for the game. I figured out eventually that it was better to have like the simplest input possible, so that I didn't worry about like things that don't matter. So that's all that's in my dialogue. Going back to the tool, we iterate over all the prefabs. We look for we iterate over all the components in every prefab. We get it into like the editor's serialized version of it, so we can change private shit on it. And then we look for any fields that are of the dialogue chunk array type, which is just like this. And that's how all the dialogue is represented in the game as dialogue chunk arrays. Whether it's 1 or 10 or whatever. And we go in there and we say, like we know this is a dialogue thing, we want to say, check if there's a term for this already in our localization like prefab or whatever. If there is, then let's just make sure that our like format of what a term looks like right here is the actual like string layout. So it's like dialogue is the category, and then there's like what is the prefab that this is on, and then what is the like property path, which is like if this is deep down in the if this is deep down like several levels deep in properties instead of at like the top, I want to see the entire path of like some struct to hold data, like some smaller struct to hold data with inside the top struct, and then dialogue chunk. If that's under our top prefab, I want to like see that path to get down there. So if there's an issue with it, or basically I just want to know where and how it's associated with what thing in the game, and that's like a useful representation of that, the property path, because that shows the like chain of properties you have to take to get down to this. Anyway, I assign that as like a private field on the dialogue chunk, so that when we're actually playing this dialogue, we can use that term to look up the localization. And I also set the default like English translation to be the same as whatever this dialogue chunk's text like dialogue field says right now. So it just matches, and that's useful. So basically if I go and edit a bunch of dialogue shit, I can run this tool and it will like go over everything and like make sure that all of the like English language version at least matches what I have typed into the dialogue chunk. And then before I send this off to be translated, I need to make sure my side is locked so it doesn't end up not matching in Japanese or whatever. And then if any mono behavior or if any field of the mono behavior that we're currently on has been changed, then we want to like apply the modified properties to the mono behaviors, like editor representation of the data so that it's actually like saved properly. And then I also just print like which prefabs were changed. Chunks. That weird. Chunks is not equal empty prefab name colon chunks. It's weird that this would be prefab name and not mono behavior name, but I'm not really worried about it. Okay, so that's one tool. Another tool I made is to run over all the scripts in the game, and this was like fun for me to work on because I don't really do like text parsing as like a thing. So this was an interesting problem, but so I run over every script file in the game and I search for things that look like, I'll find it so you can see an example. Things that look like this. So anywhere in any script that I've typed locutils translate quote something, end quote, end parentheses. I want to take whatever's in that quote and make a term out of that. And that may or may not stick until the final game, but I at least want to like do a first pass of automating all of that because there might be like 100 of those in the game, and it's way easier for me to automate this process with, you know, a 30-line piece of code than to like go through 100 things and like copy paste the text and then paste it over into the term thing and then wait the like 3 seconds that it takes for the term to actually generate because my term list has gotten pretty huge. So this was like a cool thing to make. Logo scripts. Oh, okay. This was not. this was just getting the list of scripts, I guess. So it's longer than 30 lines. This is the actual. We have all the scripts. Here's like my bad regex to like get all of the matching strings that match this thing, and then m value does not contain quote. I was having a problem with this regex doing like in the C# script actually typing like the quotes to make sure that my search matches the quote thing, and so I just like eventually gave up and was like, okay, we'll just get whatever's in parentheses and then I'll manually get rid of like the quotes myself, and some issues arose from that, but those were easier to clean up than it was for me to like spend hours trying to figure out this like obscure regex thing. And regex, if you don't know, is just like trying to match basically this string here describes like a pattern that we're looking for in text, and the parentheses and dot star question mark is like means something in regex, which is like, you know, kind of another language of code, but for a very specific sort of thing. Hey guys, welcome. So every like 3 or 4 months, I have some random one-off use for regex, and I have to like go learn it again, kind of. But that's what this is. That's what this is for. And yeah, it was cool. Next tool. Fix broken term pop-ups. This is useful for me. Term pop-up, attributed properties, check if valid term. Okay, so when I yeah, absolutely. Regex sucks, but it's really good when you need it. Like, it does the thing that you need, and there's not really another way to do it. Okay, so when I switched to using categories, like I mentioned before, I'm just gonna leave my hair down. When I switched to using categories, like I mentioned before, I had in a few places in code, I can find one of these, a few places in code where I switched to having like an inspector representation of a term, which is a thing that I2 includes, where you can use what looks like an enum dropdown to define like what term I'm using here, but internally it's represented as a string, so it's not like, I don't know, it's not associated with an int ID, it's just like a string that shows up here as like a pop-up. And when I switched everything to using categories, I did that with an automated process, but all of my term pop-ups in all my prefabs like didn't get updated automatically. Like this, previously this said, instead of description, adventure mode description, it just said adventure mode description. And once I updated the dialog to like have a category, this was out of date. It didn't match the term. When I would play the game, it would just pop up with like adventure mode description on the screen instead of what it was supposed to. So this other tool goes through all the prefabs, goes like I was talking about before, goes through all the mono behaviors. This is gross. Why don't I just do what I did up here? I don't want to think about my motivation on this because the tool is done and it works right at this moment. Like basically the idea was I want to look over for each of these term pop-ups, which is just like, I guess I should show that actually. Main menu, term pop-up. So it just looks like this. It's just an attribute you add to like tell it I want to have this drop down, and I'm going to use that drop down to select what this string is, and there's no string entry field. So it kind of takes away some error from the user, which is great. But so what I'm doing here is I'm going through finding all the properties on this object, or all the fields. I keep saying properties. All the fields that are a term have the terms pop up attribute, and then for those I want to run through literally all of the terms in the dictionary and say, hey, does this term match? Like, does the thing I have here match an existing term? If it does, like, let's make sure that the categories part at the start of that like actually matches this, and that like automated my process of like updating those terms to like have the category thing at the start, which in retrospect I kind of spent a lot of time doing this thing to like find attribute. That's the reason I needed to do this weird thing with the fields instead of just like doing the thing I did up above, which was just like looking for a iter the type of a dialog chunk, because I needed to get to the actual like field info of this thing so that I could get the attribute of it, or check if it has the attribute. So that part specifically was a little bit complicated, but I'm glad I did it, because I hadn't really worked with like, how do I get an attribute and like check its data. And although in Sausage I probably won't use that, it's like, I don't know, it's a useful engineering thing to be like, oh, now I could write an attribute and like, you know, use that for some reason in the future. So that was useful. This works fine. I don't know if I ended up using this or not. This was from some like fucking what's it called? It's from some forum where programmers like figure out the best solution to stuff. It's the really famous one. I don't know why I'm brain farting so hard, but I didn't use it, so I don't need it. Okay. Really, my throat's really going here. Next one, I think this is the last one. Yeah, it's the last one. So this one processes an enum. Basically, there's a lot of times where I have an enum set where I like have a bunch of things defined in this enum that inevitably I'll want to have translated, like the team names, or like the character names, or the hat names, or the game state types, or input types for like the rebind menu, stuff like that. And rather than like manually adding those to the term list, yeah, Alex, it was Stack Overflow for sure. That was probably the first website I went to when I was learning to program, so it's weird that I would forget the name. Yeah, you guys got it. Okay. Yeah, so it's very common that I would want to convert an enum into term list in in my thing over there. So I just wrote this template function, and it's a little bit weird because I could write a new one of these that takes an argument or takes a. I could give the type like prefab or game object, I guess. And when I ran this, this would just throw an error and not work. Oh, actually, because I restricted it with the struct type, that's a little bit of safety. Just in the future, if you're writing a generic function and you want to use an enum as the thing, you can't strictly force it to be an enum type, but you can force it to be a struct, which forces it to be a value type rather than a reference type, like a class or something or an object. And then you can just like at the start check that it's an enum and like throw a nasty error. So that's what that is. So I could put like some other structs. I don't know. Is a vector2 a struct? Yeah, so I could put a vector2. That's obviously I can't convert that into a, like if I try to get the enum values from it, that's gonna blow up in my face and like not work. So, but that's as close as you can get to like forcing a generic function to accept a enum as a type. Anyway, this runs through the enum. It takes the type as the category, which is useful so that I have that like menu in I2 like I was talking about. I2 open. I don't know why I changed code. Should not have done this. Yeah, so I get this thing, and like hats is a good example. Let's get rid of default. So now I have all the hats in here, and it was automatic, and I didn't need to do anything, and it also entered like the English name here. So when I exported this to my spreadsheet in Google Sheets, I could just use like a, what's it called? I could just use a function to like convert the entire Japanese row to be the translation of the cell next to it. So that was crazy easy. Oh man. Yeah, that's all the tools I wrote pretty much. I already showed the like util wrapper that was like me wrapping their translation and forcing the game to, even if there's not an existing translation, I still want to show something just as like don't break the game, but like inform, like if this is in the editor it would throw a warning, but I don't want it to break the game, so I just show the same, I show the thing that you fed in the text field, but I do throw a warning. Yeah, that's all the tools for localization. I still have a bunch more stuff to talk about. Shit. We drink some water. How's everybody doing tonight? Sorry, I started kind of late. I was helping somebody move today. Okay. Okay, next up is Lotcheck stuff. If you aren't familiar, Lotcheck is Nintendo Switch, and it was the same for Wii and stuff, but it's their cert process. You've heard of console cert, presumably, where you have to like send your build to them at Nintendo, and then they have some process of like reviewing it and telling you where it's broken before you can actually get it done or get it onto the store. I submitted the week before GDC, so it's been a bit, but over like a course of 2 weeks or something, they sent me a bunch of issues, and now I'm like mostly through fixing them, and I'm going to resubmit again this week. But some of those are like logistics forms on their end where I have to like define, I have to say like what features I'm using. Nice, Alex, that's cool. Skateboarding dog game, that sounds rad. Yeah, but I like for every Switch feature that I'm using, I basically have to write a like a series of steps for them to test it, and then they'll do that. And so sometimes they'll like change features, or like add new features is weird because it's like hardware, but they'll add new software features or whatever, and I have to like, if I want to use any of those, then I have to like write a test case for it or whatever. No, it's all good, Alex. When they added recently that they announced in the Nintendo Direct or whatever, is that you can take videos now of games on the Switch, and it doesn't really cost any performance. There's like a memory overhead, but that's pretty much it. So if I want to use that, I think I have to write like how to test that feature or something. So they also report any crashes or lockups and stuff, which happens if any error happens during your release build, that immediately crashes the game, and it doesn't spit out an error, I don't think. Or maybe in the crash log it does. It would show like the stack trace, and you would be able to see like what function caused this problem. So they'll report like where your game locks up and they have to restart, or if there's a soft lock, or so there's that kind of stuff. One of the ones that I'm gonna work on probably tomorrow. I'm like pretty tired already, but if you have my Switch here, I don't have Joy-Cons on my table, but if you are playing in like handheld mode like this, and then you take the controllers off and set the Switch down and then start playing that way, but when you do that, you're already in a game. right now, as it is, the new controllers, like, or the controllers that are in your hand now are read by the game, by Sausage, as 2 new controllers instead of as the handheld controller, but now switched to like docked mode. Is that right? No, to tabletop mode. It doesn't register that you pulled those off. It just thinks that those are 2 new controllers. So I need to fix that so you can switch between and do whatever you want at will, and not like the really annoying thing is if I start playing adventure mode by myself in handheld mode, and then my buddy walks over or whatever, and they're like, oh, I want to join, and I'm like, oh, here, let me pull these off, hand you one, we can play together, because that's the cool thing of Sausage. But right now, what will happen is you'll pull them off, hand it to the other person, and then nothing you can do will get back to the menu. You can't pause it, you can't change anything. You just like are stuck until you redock, and then like go back to the menu, and then you can make that change. So they actually reported that as an issue, and it's like obviously something I should fix. So I gotta do that. Let me look, see if there's anything else I want to talk about. A lot of the bugs that I have reported are like things from 3 weeks ago before GDC or whatever, and I've already fixed all of them, or already fixed a lot of them, but I need to test it and like really make sure it's bulletproof before submitting in gang and having the same bugs. That'd be a waste of their time. Yeah, none of these are really that interesting to talk about. Yeah. So that's that. I did a bunch of bug fixes this week. As I mentioned last week, and probably the time before that, I've sent out builds of the game to like, a bunch of my friends and coworkers and previous coworkers and stuff, and said, break this, tell me if you hate it, tell me why you hate it, tell me where you got stuck, tell me where you stopped playing because you got bored, tell me how the UI is broken, all this stuff. And that feedback has been slowly flooding in over weeks. And it's good. I'm fixing stuff. This week, some of the stuff I fixed. This week was still a slow week, I would say, and a lot of my time was spent doing this localization stuff. Probably like 80% of my time. But there was actually swoop. Let me go to my screenshots folder. Okay, so this was the UI clipping thing. It's kind of hard to see, but right here you might be able to tell that the roof is like cutting through the UI a little bit, like it's rendering over the UI. and also the hat card is rendering over the UI, and also the text here is like not aligned as it should be. So that was like one of the bugs I worked on. Another one is this isn't an actual screenshot of the game. This is like a screenshot with a colorblind filter applied to it. This was something Bryce reported that in paint mode, if I'm I don't think we decided if Bryce mentioned that this was red, green, or one of the other types of colorblind, but if you're this type of colorblind, which is it's very easy to like get this like filter to like test your game and make sure it's readable. But in this specific type of colorblind, it's really hard to read specifically this text, and wherever this red, or if there's like an orange team or something, or maybe a purple team, they would all be kind of hard to read against the yellow in the background. So what I did was I changed all of the fonts on this page to be the same as this one, where it's like a black outline. And I think it like graphics design wise was better previously, but usability is like more important than that, especially in cases like this where it's like statistics and like information about the game. So we made that change. This is a bug that has been plaguing me forever, and I sort of have a fix to it, but I'm not really happy with the fix yet. So the pause menu can have a variable number of buttons depending on what mode you're in. If you're in the overworld, there's 4 buttons. There's resume, player select, main menu, and options. But if I go into the hat store, I only have resume, main menu, and options, because going to player select from the hat shop then has to dump you back into the hat shop, which may actually be fine. But just like some areas of the game, like the flow doesn't make sense to have certain options, so I remove them, whatever. But this menu needs to like fit to the buttons. Like you can see here, this like, you know, the buttons don't fit, they're not laid out correctly, so it's fucked up. And that happens. The case in which it happens is you enter a new place, and then the first time you pause, it's fucked up, and then the second time you pause, it's correct. And then every time subsequent, it's correct until you go to another place. And that's super annoying. And my fix is kind of a hack where I like wait a frame and then like turn it off and on again, and then that like, for whatever fucking reason, that's enough time for the UI system to recognize, oh, there's been a change, let's like mark this as dirty, and then a frame passes is enough time for that step to happen, and then I can say, okay, turn it off and then on again, and that will like, you know, mark it as, or that will take that dirty flag, say, oh, we need to rebuild, it will rebuild, and then it's good. So that's what's happening there. I mentioned this. There's a big issue that faced a lot of players actually, where they would get some amount far in adventure mode and then quit playing to go do something, or switch to try quick play, or switch to try free play, and then they would go back to adventure mode and they would load in and there would be no quests in the overworld for them. It was basically just loading as if it was quick free play. So there were no quests, there was no like adventure, it was just, you know, just free play. And it turned out that when I was for the main menu, I redid the main menu recently, as you might remember, and when I did that, I added a continue or a new adventure button, and for some reason, just some stupid bug, main menu, start. So right here we go. So when I awake the main menu for the first time, I set here, this is the continue button, and this is the new game button. And I just like add a listener to call this function, and I either say this is a new game or this is not a new game. And right here, when I checked, this is what was there. So I was only setting the adventure mode flag you know, I was only setting the adventure mode flag if you were going into a new game, which meant if the adventure mode had been set to false when I went to quick play or to free play, then you go back to adventure. Or if you quit the app and then open it again, that also resets, you know, the preferences or whatever, or this specific flag at least. And so you were never able to get back into adventure mode unless you did a new one. So I figured that, you know, that took maybe half an hour to figure out, and that I would say that affected like I would say 5 people reported that to me. I don't know if everybody who had the issue reported it, but Mauricio, you saw this, yeah. That's good. I saw that one. This one's an interesting one that I realized today has like my fix has a fucked up connotation. In sumo, you would die, you would run out of lives, and then let's say you're playing against 3 bots and you're a human and you run out of lives first, and you're like, I'm bored, I want to quit. You press pause, nothing happens, and this is because the place where I check whether players are pausing, instead of iterating over all of the player infos, which is my like registry of registered devices or bots. I call them player infos, but it's just like, this is a data structure that holds your controller if you have one, your team ID if you have one, your player number, your name, your character, your skin, your hat, I guess a bunch of stuff. And it's used all over the game. But instead of using that, I was using like the list of spawned players, and that's like not ideal. Like it's looking into this issue, I realized my system's kind of fucked up because there's no way for me to look at players' rebound inputs without a spawned player. Does that make sense? Like when I go to the rebind menu, I can change all my shit, and then in the game, if I rebound my jump button to the right bumper, I could, I'd hit the right bumper, it would make me jump. But for the pause menu, if I were to iterate over my list of player infos, the player info itself doesn't hold that, it doesn't have the functions to convert a check for like, is pause pressed or is jump pressed or is dash pressed, to get out of that like the correctly rebound button mapped thing. So I can only check from the input or from the player info, I can only check, are you pressing the A button? Are you pressing the X button? So that's not really ideal, and I haven't figured out a solution yet for this. I'm not really sure. I have this player manual. Getting a little bit too far into this probably. I have this component called actor input that holds a bunch of stuff, and then holds a bunch of stuff about input, like stuff that any actor, which would be potentially a player controlled player, or anything that conceivably could be taken over and given direction by some like I don't know, some other entity. I think of this as like, if at some point in the game I wanted to if I wanted to control a crab, I don't know why this would happen, but let's say I added a toy to the game where you could like put a crab on a platform and then stomp on it, and then your character would disappear and you're the crab now. I'm not gonna do this because it would be complicated, but if I wanted to do this, I could just override this actor input with like a crab input and then define how that, or I might just be able to use it directly in the crab class. But basically the idea is I want an arbitrary like thing that doesn't have to do with players but still manage the input. And the point of me explaining this is player manual input is a descendant of that, and to make things faster, to make it faster every frame to like check input of characters, I cache. I take this dictionary of how do I explain it? I take this dictionary of input types, which is like the sausage layer of like input types. So like like you see here, like movement, indirections, jumping, dashing, lifting, pausing. And I reach into that dictionary and grab the control, which is the in control, which is my input management layer of input stuff, which actually gets me the input from basically my rebinding stuff. Like it matches my rebound shit to like what's actually the underlying like value of the button that I want. And this gives me the like control. Basically, this gives me the enum that I need to use when I'm actually like checking input, so it's faster. Is that the right explanation? Okay, so that's a little bit wrong actually. The reason I'm doing this, I cache whenever a player is created, I cache all of their rebound input stuff. So I get whatever input control, which is like the in control actual class object that represents like that button or that stick, or I should say that stick direction, because in control gives you like 4 different controls for that. But I cache those object references so that every frame I don't need to do a dictionary lookup to my rebind inputs to get which which button I'm using, and then I don't have to again use another dictionary to get the control, that object reference from the button that I'm using. So I do, instead of every frame potentially doing like dozens of these like double dictionary lookups, I just cache all of them at once I create a player. The reason I'm explaining this is because I don't do this on the player info, I do this on the player manual input component, which lives on the player, like in the scene, instead of which becomes like when I'm trying to check every frame for if somebody's pausing, I can't iterate over players that don't exist. So it becomes this weird problem of like, oh, well, do I need to move this rebind input thing over to the player info? And then if I do that, like, like it's, maybe that's fine. Like maybe that doesn't mess up this interface at all because the rebind input dictionary lives over here. Maybe I could just move these controls over to that as well, and then this get input control, instead of being just like directly get this from this instance, I could get it from the save data, and like maybe that's fine. Or I guess I could put this function on the save data, and then wherever this is used, I could grab from the save data. That seems okay. That was actually something I was worried about, but maybe that's the way to do it. So good to talk through that stuff. Oh, cool. Mauricio, I'm glad you sent me a list. I will definitely check it out. Nice, nice, nice. Cool. Okay, that's like all the stuff I wanted to talk about. I didn't expect this to last an hour, but I guess it did. Oh man, my voice is killing me. I'll show you one more thing that I worked on today that I'm pretty excited about. And it's super dumb. It's like not a great use of my time, but I'm excited about it. Show you unpack. So for maybe 8 months or something, I've had trash cans in the overworld that you can jump into, and your body fits into it, and you can wag your head and stuff. Yeah, I don't mind that idea, Mauricio. Having it separate from the players. I think having it on the player info makes sense because there's never like a player info won't ever exist without without having some input associated. So I think it makes the most sense to have them together probably. Okay, so yeah, these trash cans exist. You can get in them, and until recently, your tail and wings would kind of like stick out the sides of it. Turn the music off. And it just looked like very jank and unpolished, and I was like kind of frustrated by it for a while. And I knew the solution was gonna have to be some like shader bullshit. So I finally got around to doing that, and it's still like is a little bit jank. Like if you look very close, you can see as I fall into this bucket that my chest kind of gets clipped. Let me know if you can see that on the stream. Obviously you can see my tail get clipped, but that's fine. I think that like 2 frames of like jankness is way better than like your tail is just always through the side of the trash can. So I think it's way funnier to like have your body locked in the trash can. So okay, so I'll show how this works too, I guess. Because it was kind of an interesting problem that was kind of like sitting in the back of my brain for a bit. And it's not like a smart, it's not that smart of a solution. Unity, please, just get out of play mode. Why does it take 10 seconds? Okie doke. Let's get rid of the collision. Okay, air sensor I want to have on. Okay. So the way this works, man, this fucking layers, dude. The way this works is I added onto my garbage cans under the prefab this component called can clip, or clip can, I guess, which also has a trigger collider on it. Just happens to be a capsule. Could be a sphere, I guess, but it doesn't really matter. And this also has a player sensor, which is just a component that manages. Yeah, Mauricio, I am discarding pixels. A player sensor is just a component that listens for like trigger and I think just trigger actually. Get out. Trigger, yeah. So it just listens for triggers and maintains a list of things that we've hit, and this is some bullshit. Like I'm not gonna talk about that because it's not even like a useful optimization. But yeah, this clip can thing, so on this I define a radius and a height of a can. So I'm just using it for the trash cans right now, but it's totally reasonable that I would want to add another kind of can shaped thing that players can get into, and I want them to like not be weird, not have their arms and legs stick weirdly out of the sides. So there's a clip can thing. When the clip can senses a player, like when a player goes into it, we get that player's material, and then Visual Studio, are you good? Are you cool, dude? What the fuck? Let's just restart Visual Studio, I guess. Yeah, so we take whatever players in our list, we assign them material like the radius and position of this trash can, and also the height of the trash can is like some shader parameters. So pivot is just like the position of this thing. You know, I should have also sent the up direction. That probably is causing some weirdness. Some of the trash cans are bent a little bit. I'm not gonna worry about that now. It looks fine as it is. Or I send the pivot and I send the bounds, which includes the radius and the height, and then the third component is just like turn this effect on or off basically. And then yeah, so we assign that on sensed, and then over in sausage utils, which is my player shader, there's a bunch of bullshit happening in here that I'm not going to talk about right now. But what we do here is we get, so to figure out if this pixel that we're looking at is inside the trash can, we know the position of the trash can, we know the position in world space of this pixel, we get that from the vert shader. So we just get the distance along the X and Z to get whether we're, you know, inside the trash can radius, and then the height is like the bottom, you know, the position we got is the bottom, and then the position plus the height, which is one of the parameters we passed in, so we can check if we're above the bottom, which is check if world pose Y is greater than can pivot Y, and then if we're below the top, check that can pivot Y plus can bounds Y, which is height, is greater than our like pixel's position in world space. So this half is just like a bool basically, like if it's 1 then it's true, if it's false it's 0, and that's what step does for us. It like sets it to 1 or 0 if the second component is greater than the first component. Same with the radius, like we just do step to say is our distance greater than our bounds. And then we multiply all these together, because if we're not in the radius, or if we're not above the bottom, or if we're not below the top, then we just want it to be 0 because we're not inside the can. And then we clip, we do negative because clip only discards the pixel if it's below 0, so we want to use the negative. And then the can bound Z is like whether this is on or off, like I mentioned. It's just a float, like I said. If it's, you can use it if it's 0 or 1 to be a bool. And then we use the init world pose W. This is kind of weird. I manually went through all the characters and marked in vertex color which parts I allow, like which ones I think, which verts I think should be allowed to be discarded. So like on the characters, that's like, you know, they're, I don't know how to represent a sausage animal. If it's like this is the body, like their butt and legs and tail and shit can be discarded, but their head shouldn't, even if their head dips over the side of the can. So that's what's going on there. Nothing too crazy, and it works really nice. Like there's some, like I showed, it might have been visible on the stream or not, but sometimes they're like butt, as it's just getting into the can, you can kind of see like, their waist isn't really a valid word, but like their tummy, I guess is what you call it, like their stomach. Sometimes that gets clipped a little bit and you can see it, but that would be easily solved by me doing another pass over all the characters and like adjusting their vertex color. But I really think it's not that noticeable, and it's already so much better than it was of having like their wings and tail just sticking out the side of the can. So it might just be not high priority enough for me to fix that. So that's where I'm at. I kind of forgot that I had done that. Is there anything else going on? What's this issue? Oh, I get, this is something I should talk about probably. Last week I talked about I2 localization, and I think it was last week, and I praised it for being like really easy to use and easy to get started with and stuff, and that's totally true. I still think it's probably by far the best way to do localization in Unity. But something I ran into this week when I was doing switch builds is that plugin in a pretty recent version, like maybe maybe 2 or 3 months ago or something, they added an update where they'll try to part one is they try to download the most recent version of like the Google. If you have like a Google sheet with the translations, if you're doing a PC app or whatever, when it starts up, it's totally reasonable that you'd be like, oh, let me download this spreadsheet, and that's like the new localization for the game, and you can set how often you want it to like download that and use it. And on Switch, if you don't have like online permissions, and if you're not doing the right online interface and shit, that just like is an error and crashes your app. So that like was pretty annoying. Eventually I figured out like you can just turn it to never download it, and that solved that problem. But then next step of that problem is that same service of like downloading the Google Sheet. Part two is the plugin tries to store that downloaded sheet or whatever sheet you have locally saved to a local file to be used. The next time you open the app, if you want to use the cache most recent download, it'll use that instead of whatever the local cache version is. And that's like a nice feature, but not how it should be always, without an option to not do that, because on some platforms, namely consoles, like you have, in my case, I have like a hard save data. I have a hard limit of how much shit I can save to the console. And like I mentioned before, there are 10,000 words in the game. And if you put 10,000 words in one column and then 10,000 words in a second column and then the like term in a third column, that's 30,000 words. And I don't know, I guess I'm going to do the math times, let's say like 7 characters per word, or let's do like 5 characters per word times 1 byte. I don't know what the math is. It turned out that this file that the game, or that the plugin was trying to save, was bigger than the max save file that you're allowed to save on Switch as like save data, or that you're allowed to like store on the console, and that's like not good. It's like not cool, and there was no way to turn it off except for me to go into the plugin and just start commenting shit out until I could get it to like still work without doing that save thing, and still like use the local version that I like marked to be included in the game. So I'm probably gonna send an email to the i2 people and be like, hey, this is an issue I ran into. I feel like it's pretty serious, and if you have anybody else that's updating to the latest version of your plugin, they're gonna run into the same problem as me, and it's like you're gonna get the same email again. So you should probably just like on your end disable this, and also here's how I did it in my project. So like at least I need a checkbox to be like, this is like, don't do this. So that was a big frustration this week. I basically was like, I had a deadline of sending a build to Nintendo, and that night I like the preceding week I had been like working on translation stuff, and that night was the first time I built a Switch with the translation stuff, and then I was like, oh no, there's an error. I'll just fix it. And then there was another error, and then I was like in what do you call it, like kind of like build hell, where I was like, oh, I don't know, I have zero idea how long it's gonna take, how many errors are gonna crop up in like my chain of errors to get this fixed. I don't know how long it's gonna take, so I was just up all night trying to fix that, and I was proud of this localization thing, so I wanted to show it. And my only other option, because I had been working on localization all week long and that was all I had been committing, would be to revert to like a very old build that also would be missing a lot of just like general fixes that I was adding as I was doing localization stuff. So it was just like a brutal night, and like a very like the first couple days I started the localization stuff, I was like very excited and like felt like I was on the right track, and like it was like smart or clever of me to like start it when I did, and like the way I was approaching it was clever. And then um, this happened, and I was like, oh my god, I just wasted a week, and I'm gonna have to undo all this localization and just like be fucking sad. But it turned out to be okay. It turned out to be like a solvable problem, but it it's one of those examples of like a Unity plugin being like mostly good, and then when it counts, they like is fairly likely to fuck you over in some way or like cause you some misery. So that's kind of where I'm at. Um, I guess in the trend of the last few weeks, I can talk a little bit about what's next, and it doesn't really vary that much from previous weeks. What's next? So for me, top priority right now is getting another Lotcheck build in Nintendo. So that's maybe that'll be like Tuesday or Wednesday. I still have a few things from their Lotcheck list that I think that I've already fixed, but I want to like triple super check to make sure. And there's like the other big one is like the finale of the game is unpolished is too strong a word. Riso, it's all right. It's it's shipping a game. This kind of stuff happens. Anyway, the finale, unpolished is kind of too nice of a word. It's a little bit busted. Like there's some dialogue that is temp still, and I need to fix that. I still expect one more fail from Lotcheck, but it would be nice to actually like be happy with the next one I send them as like this could be the shipping one. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I have a list of like 30 quality of life improvements I want to make. That a lot of that is based on like playtest feedback and stuff from the last couple of weeks. Hey, welcome, Brass Heads. Brass Head. How's it going? Yeah, I mean, I like for the next week at least. I think that's probably going to be the stuff I'm focused on: Lotcheck and the finale and the quality of life stuff. One big kind of it's not really a feature. It's more of like a tech improvement. Is I've talked about this before on stream, but the overworld right now unloads every time you go into like the hat shop or the gym or one of the arenas, instead of just like doing this where I just disable the whole thing. And I guess I don't know for sure that would be a big saving, but it feels like it would be. In load time specifically, I should say. So on Switch at least, it's like a 12-second load time when you're loading to the overworld. And if I go to the hat shop, that means I know I'm going to have to come back to the overworld, which means I know I'm going to have this long load time. So I really don't want people to be discouraged from getting new hats by a long load time back to the overworld, because that would suck. So I want to try that tech change to just like keep the overworld in the scene at any given time. I guess I can try just moving the overworld route to the don't destroy on load, and then if I go back to the main menu, then do destroy it. Oh man, I wonder if that would work. I'll have to check that out. All that said, I think I'm about done. Pretty tired. Like I said, I helped my friend move today, and I was like, long day, and I didn't get that much sleep last night, so I'm like pretty ready to zonk out. Hang out for another minute or two though. Yeah, be sure to, Mauricio, be sure to check out your feedback pretty soon. Probably tomorrow evening. Oh, there's also, I might have talked about this last week too, but there's like a Mac issue that I can't really test. Like my Mac doesn't seem to have this problem, but I had two people say that they opened the game on a Mac and it just like doesn't open, and then the only way to get it to open is to like hold Alt as it's opening to get the resolution to pop up, and then like pick the right resolution. I think I might be doing something weird in my player settings where I like try to manually restrict like which resolutions are allowed. Resolution. Full screen switch. Weird. I have all supported aspect ratios. Okay. Anyway, I gotta figure that out. It's not a huge deal yet. Like if I couldn't figure that out until just before the Steam launch, that would be fine because I'm definitely in like Switch mode right now. But okay, I think I'm gonna end it here. Let's say this is the end. Thank you all for coming, and I hope this has been useful and like you enjoy it. Sorry you kind of showed up at the end, Brasshead, but I appreciate you joining anyway. Feel free to follow, I think is the word on Twitch, to just like get notified when I do another stream. Yeah, I do these every Sunday. Sometimes I do a work session in the middle of the week. Yeah, Mauricio, if you could do that and see if that happens to you too, that would be super useful. So far the people that have tried it are on like the super latest version of OS X. I think like I don't even know what it's called, but it's like pretty new. So if you happen to not be on the newest one and then it doesn't happen to you, then that kind of gives me some direction. So we can talk about that after this though. Again, thanks for coming. Follow if you want. I'll be back next Sunday.